Last week, the United Nations voted to award Palestine non-member observer state status by a wide margin, 138 nations in favor of the resolution, 9 against, including the State of Israel. The UN ambassador from Israel, Ron Prosor, spoke just moments before that vote, and he joins me now. Ambassador, thank you for joining us at JN1.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about that vote. What, in practical terms, does this change mean?
Okay, on the ground, nothing changes. So a Palestinian waking up tomorrow morning, nothing changes for him. And that's the point that we wanted to make. It raises expectations, it raises frustrations, and it doesn't change anything on the ground. And in the sense, we have learned in the past that when we really wanted to make peace, we directly negotiated with Egypt. It wasn't imposed from the outside. We directly negotiated with Jordan. It wasn't imposed from the outside. And I think it's important that the message to the Palestinians is, hey, you can't do things unilaterally. You can't breach unilaterally agreements that we sign, because at the end of the day, peace is hard work, sitting at the negotiation table, sleepless nights, sometimes frustrating, but there's no way to circumvent it.
In your remarks, you said that the international community was turning a blind eye to commitments that Israel and Palestine had made between each other. Are you suggesting some kind of bias within the General Assembly?
Well, in the General Assembly towards Israel, of course, there's bias, and we've seen that for years from racism, Zionism, nearly every decision, and it's the numbers game. There are 22 countries of the Arab League, there are 56 countries of the Organization of Islamic Countries, and there are 120 countries of the non-alignment movement. So let's say that this assembly is not exactly conducive to Israel. But the point that I want to make is not that. The point that I want to make is that anyone who gave his hand for this resolution, at the end of the day, is not promoting peace, but takes peace backwards.
But are you saying then, countries like France voted for this resolution. Is France not in favor of peace?
Okay, I think it's a valid question. I think many countries, let's say like-minded countries, really had good intentions. They feel that by voting for this, they really strengthen Abu Mazen. But what do? For an Israeli citizen, we signed agreements with the Palestinians. We gave tangibles for it. And they can't just wake up in the morning and decide to breach those agreements and then come to us and say, hey, let's start from square one.
In addition to France voting for the resolution, Great Britain abstained, Australia abstained. Is there an increasing sense that Israel is becoming isolated at a very critical time in the UN?
Well, the isolation part is not new. The point that I want to make is that I think it's important for the international community to understand that it has to try and bring both sides together to direct negotiations. The Palestinian resolution talks nothing about, recognition of the State of Israel, Israel's right to self-determination. It doesn't talk about Israel's security needs, its borders. It doesn't talk about anything that pertains to, agreements that were signed on both sides. So it's wrong on all those categories. And at the end of the day, I would say to Abu Mazen, instead of flying 10 hours to New York, you'd better take and drive 10 miles from Ramallah to Jerusalem. That's more constructive than anything else. Well,
let me ask you, though, in this aspiration that you said in your speech again that Israel has been striving for peace, hours after the vote, it was revealed Israel was in preliminary planning stages for settlement construction in the E1 districts east of Jerusalem. A lot of people are seeing this as a provocative measure. The U.S. immediately criticized it. Ambassadors, including your predecessor at the Court of St. James, summoned. Was there a line that was crossed there?
Israel, I think, has the right to define its national security interests. And it's obvious that if someone does something unilaterally, Israel will react accordingly, so that the other side doesn't really feel that it can do things and breach agreements and then continue as if nothing happened. I'll tell you, if you look at it from an Israeli perspective, here is a Palestinian state being proclaimed. The world, supports it. Abu Mazen controls a Palestinian state. The only state that was formed is, I think, the state of denial. He doesn't control Hamas. He doesn't control 40% of his population. He stands up And who does he talk to? When I speak to them, is it Abbas or is it Hamas?
Are there steps that Hamas can take that they become another partner in the peace process?
I'll be very, very honest. Hamas is an organization that doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. What do you want me to negotiate with them? How big the hole? How wide the coffin? What flowers to basically order for my funeral? There's not much that we can negotiate with someone who doesn't recognize our right to exist.
Let me ask you a final, broader question on the Middle East. Egypt, obviously, on the ascent, helping negotiate a ceasefire with the recent Gaza crisis. But then we also turn to see something much more amiss going on in Syria, talk of sarin gas weapons. This is a really a volatile time, growth in democracy, but sinister feelings on other sides. What's your take on how Israel can position itself to gain allies and friends in the region?
First, I'd like to remind your viewers, how many times in the past did you hear that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a major conflict in the Middle East? You solve that, you solve most of the problems. Really. Syria, Egypt, Tunisia, Bahrain, Yemen, everything up in the air. Israel? Absolutely not. We have to solve the problem for our own merits. But it shows you that the Middle East is a bit bigger. Now to your question, what you see before you taking place is really a clash within a civilization between the Shiite and the Sunnite divide. You see on Syria a battlefield taking place between Iran on the one side and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and the Shiite-Sunnite divide in a country where everything comes out. And you see this volatile region, which means, at least for an Israeli perspective, the risks are enormous around us. I didn't even mention in Iran. We have to be very, very cautious and look at things very carefully. At the end of the day, this is, and Israel's security and the security of its people are paramount to achieving peace. Only a lasting peace could be achieved if Israel would be secure.
Ambassador Prosor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.